when you're single, self-development or working on yourself can only go so far because you don't have an outside person challenging your ideas or your values.
Pick back up on this because it seems like we got so much to talk about.
Traditionally Untraditional, take 3.
So, welcome to another episode of Traditionally Untraditional. Today, we're asking the question, are relationships complicated, or are we making them more complicated than they need to be? It's an interesting question, right? Because we see so many relationship conversations and podcasts popping up. And one of the things that I often like to say is like, there's nothing new under the sun. And so it's interesting for us to look at relationships today, compare them to our grandparents and great grandparents or whatever, and looking at their relationships. And we see that people stay married for long periods of time. And now today it seems like we're getting divorced and breaking up, or we just can't find love. There was a recent study that talks about how it was really like tailored toward women, but obviously if women are single, men are single too. But it's predicting by like 2040 or something, 55% of women will be single. And you know, we come from a reality in this century where it was quite the opposite, where 80% of people, 90% of people in some instances were married and came from two-parent homes and in relationships. And you know, you and I have talked about that a lot, the changings of time. I think a lot of it has to do with laws. A lot of it has to do with, you know, male and female equality, our understanding of how we want relationships. A big part of it is social media. We have access to see people's relationships. I don't think that that's as very new, but I do think that we probably have more access. People always had like the magazines, right? We read about celebrity and Hollywood and we focus on their relationships. But now I think that we can see other people relationships, social media influencers. These people aren't famous. We feel like they're like you and I. But we're watching their relationships and we're looking at our own relationships, and these are the things we want to have, right? And we're judging each other.
I would also add like social and cultural norms has changed drastically too.
Okay.
That's adding to part of the reason.
So the two books, we mentioned this in our last episode. The first one is The Road Less Traveled by M. Scott Peck. And the second book that we referenced, we also mentioned this in our last episode, is The Courage to be Disliked. From those two books, we pull out these principles. From The Road Less Traveled, Peck argues that life and relationships require effort, but people resist discipline. He said love isn't about a feeling, but a commitment to personal and mutual growth. In the book The Road Less Traveled, they say love is often ruined by attachment and control issues. Two interesting parts. And so the question is that I'm having for you, is love supposed to be effortless, or does the effort prove its authenticity?
Very good question. I'll start first with The Road Less Traveled, when Peck argues that life and relationships require effort, but people resist discipline. I think that discipline word needs to really be studied and understood. I think we have an unconscious response to the idea of discipline. I think that we take discipline as punishment. And unconsciously, when you feel that something is a punishment, something is restrictive, naturally we don't like it.
Yeah.
And I just had somebody recently tell me that in their 20s, even 30s, they felt like any kind of restriction was a punishment, right? I'm talking about something as simple as having financial discipline, right? budgeting, staying within your means, staying within a budget, working towards a goal. This person was expressing to me that felt like a punishment. I worked, I got paid, I should be able to spend my money, right?
Mhm.
And of course, what did that lack of discipline lead to? A lot of times they weren't able to, it was just spending. So they weren't able to, they either got in debt or just weren't able to cover bills that they should have been able to cover, rent, different things like that. They always found themselves in some kind of financial trouble. They just weren't stable financially. And then this also, not just financially in this particular person's life, but it also trickled into other areas of their life with relationships. They found themselves in conflicts in their relationship because they just lacked a certain discipline and they felt like, why should I be restricted? It's a punishment. This same person expressed to me, now they're in their 40s, they realize that something clicked for them, that discipline was not a punishment,
Mhm.
but discipline, now they understand it. It allows them to have a certain level of peace and structure to where now, guess what? I have not spent frivolously. I save. I make wiser choices. And now I do have money to actually do more, right? This particular person is
Mhm.
now moved into a home, a house, was able to buy a house, things that they just couldn't even conceive of doing before. And they realize, like, man, how much time and how difficult I made my own life because I just felt like any kind of restriction on me was a punishment. And I think we take that into relationships. We take the idea of, well, when I'm with a person, well, I shouldn't be restricted. I should be
Mhm.
free. I should be able to move. And I think that we interpret it as a punishment, and so therefore we balk at it. You get what I'm saying? We fight it. We feel uncomfortable. We feel wrong. We feel hurt. We feel restricted. We have all these negative emotions associated with discipline. But if you use the person that I gave the example of earlier, they don't feel that way anymore.
Mhm.
Now they understand, I feel more in control. I feel a sense of certainty, right? That I didn't have before. Like not even realizing that the lack of discipline was ultimately hurting that person.
Mhm.
Makes sense? And now that they are having more self control, setting more boundaries, and making better, healthier decisions, this person had expressed to me that they're just in a way better position in life. They have found a peace and just a stillness that they didn't really have before. And they just feel like, man, I wasted so much time and had so many conflicts in past relationships that might not have even occurred. So that's where I want to start with that.
No, yeah, that's a good point. I think that we we need to. The hardest part about relationships is that it's looking in a mirror with ourselves. Because when you're just by yourself, y- you don't see your flaws all the time, and then you get with this other person, and it's like now these things become glaring because, and sometimes they may not even be flaws, it's just different
Personality quirks.
personality quirks, right? And so now, how do you reconcile with this person to compromise? And I think we've gotten to a point in society where nobody wants to compromise. So it's twofold. Number one, it's like you mentioned, it's the discipline across your life. You can't just do and go wherever you want. And we see this across relationships. For men, it's where am I going? I don't want to be restricted. I don't want to check in. For women, a lot of times they talk about how they dress, right? And nobody wants these restrictions. Once I'm in this relationship, if I say to you like, "Hey, I don't want you dressing that way." Whoa, what, you insecure? Why, how are you putting restrictions on me now, right? But that's kind of a discipline. You may want to do that. You may want to stay out late. Me and you talk about how a lot of times, like, the time frame that you get in, right? When you were single, you could come in at 4 in the morning, 5 in the morning, 6 in the morning. The next day, a week later, you was by yourself. There was no discipline there. And now when you have a partner, it's like, I probably should be in by whatever your time, midnight. I probably should be in by this time. And a lot of times the discipline is one, it is protecting, a lot of times it's protecting your relationship, but also just helping you grow as a person. And I think that's what the road less travel was talking about, where he found himself looking within a lot. and thinking to himself, how can I be better? Because the whole purpose of his book is about being intentional about these relationships that he have.
Two things that I want to bring up that you said something jogged my memory. First thing was I remember watching Erica Badu. I think she was on the Breakfast Club podcast, and they were talking to her about marriage essentially. And she had said that marriage is a culture, and she didn't fit into the culture of marriage.
Yeah.
And they kind of were like, I don't know that they took her seriously or that they understood what she was saying, but I thought it was very profound, right? A self-reflection that she realized, but she wasn't downing marriage. What she was saying was there's a culture to being married. There's a certain way that you have to move and behave, right? Self-discipline. What was the word you said? Compromise. There's a lot of things that come with being in a long-term relationship with someone, essentially in marriage. And she was saying she recognized she doesn't fit that culture.
Yeah. You mentioned this before. You said making sure that we're marriage material.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what you're hitting on, right?
Right.
Making sure you're marriage material. And being a good person, sometimes it's not necessarily marriage material. When you think about, if I say that you're a good football player, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're a great quarterback. And so a lot of times people are like, I'm a good person. I don't, the thing, I don't rob, steal, kill. I don't tend to harm anybody or hurt anybody. I go to work. I treat people well, right? All of those things are great and you should be that, but it still doesn't quite mean that you're marriage material.
Mm-hmm.
Because if in the end of that, you're not willing to make those compromises, you're not willing to change yourself to fit into the culture of marriage, maybe restricting yourself, maybe becoming better in those things, you might not be marriage material. And so there are a lot of people who I think are good people, and they are. You are good people, but you may not necessarily be marriage material. And this is why a lot of people across this culture, religion, whatever, marriage counseling. The whole purpose of marriage counseling is you're sitting in front of a person that hopefully has some experience, whether they're your pastor, minister, or a counselor. They have experience and they're going through a set of questions to have you think, you and your partner, or maybe if you're by yourself, but they're having you think about, I never thought about this before. How do we, something simple, parenting. What is your parenting style? What is my parenting style? Right? Once again, going back to relationships, there are a lot of people who are good people, but not good parents. They're kind of two different things. What do you, if you can, it's not the same. Being a parent is not the same as just being a good person. So a lot of people that are good people, but you're not a good wife. You're not a good husband, right? You're not a good spouse. You're not a good partner just because you're a good person. And so part of that internal work is assessing that and looking at yourself about the relationships you're in.
I agree. I also wanted the second part that I wanted to add to what you were saying is when you're single, self-development or working on yourself can only go so far because you don't have an outside person challenging your ideas or your values. We can see this with having children. I know a lot of parents who will talk about, children have no filter. And then you see your children's behavior. I just saw a TikTok where basically I'm not sure if it was a mother or father, but basically they had their child and the caption was trying to discipline the you out of your children. And, I went straight to the comments and everybody was like, whoo, some things that my children do, I know that that's me and I see it. And it's like, oh my God, right? And it's like, this is almost written programming in them.
Mm-hmm.
The difference, though, between having children is children are not a equal relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So your children may challenge you in ways that you can kind of see yourself, but you don't have to change for your children. right? Because they're going to be your children regardless. They're dependent on you. And so therefore we throw authority out quickly with children, right? Like children, well, I know people don't say that.
Do as
Do
I
as I
say,
say.
not as I do.
Right, not as I do, which is I don't agree with, because as human beings we follow behavior. But the old one, children to be seen, not heard. I don't agree with that either. But essentially, right, we will quickly establish authority in the pecking order in the house. I'm the parent. I'm the mama, right? Respect. Sometimes we don't even. I think a lot of parents now are working on valuing the opinion and recognizing that their children have thoughts and things like that. But still, there's an authority factor there, and you don't really have to change per se, right? For your children, the struggle comes in when you're dealing with another adult.
Mm-hmm.
Another adult who can, because children for the most part can't dictate or put pressure on you to come in the house at a certain time.
Mm-hmm.
What you're wearing out the house, where you're going, and what you're doing. A lot of times, right? Children aren't even aware sometimes of where you're going and what you're doing, right? Because it's not a child's place. Your business is your business, right? But when you have another adult in the home with you or in a relationship with you, even if they're not in the home, now it's where you're going, what you're doing, who you're associating with, what you're wearing, right? And now that's a challenge that, wait a minute. So I think that when you're in relationship with somebody, that is that's when growth really starts to happen, if you allow it to happen. But it is something that you have to accept is a culture, and you cannot get to. There's no way a relationship can grow if both of us are being independent of each other. This has to be a complementary relationship where we give and we take. We make adjustments, right? And I think another reason why people are hesitant to that is because I think for so long we just lack balance, right? A lot of us, or a lot of people, have experienced or seen, especially how you brought up back in the day, how our parents were married. But the first thing we'll say is, but were they happy?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of women didn't even have rights, or women didn't have certain rights. So therefore, the only way that they could get ahead was through marriage, right? A lot of it wasn't a choice. A lot of them were married to men who hated them, essentially, or married to men who weren't good to them. So we have to acknowledge that fact, but also recognize too that that's why a lot of times people are hesitant to the idea of compromise, because it almost feels like, but what if I'm the only one compromising? Right? What if I'm the only one? And so for me, that's where we would need to talk about boundaries and establishing boundaries, having them while dating and carrying them through the entirety of the relationship, so that it's not a one-sided relationship.
So yeah, we talk about that a lot. And I would like to imagine that there were women who were happy. And one of the things I asked myself, and I don't have an answer to this, but one thing I asked myself is, was life just simpler? If we went back 100 years to 1920s, all things considered, and we were married, the things we would want out of life, and if we go back further than that, you just think about, there's no social media, there's no Instagram, there's none of those different aspects of things. Was life just simpler? Have we complicated life and therefore complicated relationships? Part of me says yes, and part of me says no. Part of me says yes because sometimes it's not a relationship thing, it's the reality of life. Like me and you talk about all the time how back in the day, a man could afford to, the way the economy at least was set up, you could afford to have a one income household. That's just not the way that our society is set up right now, right? Most people, most families, to live the life that you want to live, need two incomes. And so part of it is traditionally untraditional, is because the traditional ideas are not just being left behind because of social change, but also economic change, also just how we interact as humans have changed and the mode of that. And so there are some things that are going to be untraditional because we can't operate like that anymore. Life has become complicated. But I do think that some of it is the same because, like I said before, even though we didn't have social media, there was always a magazine, an article, a newspaper, right? A painting. There's always been somebody to compare ourselves to. That's always
I
been.
was going to say that we human beings will find a way to
Yeah.
compare. It's
Even,
almost in our nature.
even back in ancient, medieval, whatever you want to call it, you looked at the queen, you looked at the duchess, you looked at, and how beautiful her dress is and the horse that she rode, and right, and vice versa for men, right? And a lot of times, so that idea that we have comparing, and the dangerous part about comparing is a lot of times we don't have all the information. So you look at that king and you say, oh my God, if I could be princess and I could be queen. And now we learn hundreds of years later, they're like, well, did you really want to be locked in the castle? Did you really want to be one of King Henry's and possibly get your head cut off because you didn't have a boy or a girl? Right? But everybody wants to be the queen.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so the same thing is true of now. We fantasize these relationships. We see people who've been, celebrities who've been married, and we assume they have a great relationship. We assume they have a great marriage, and we just aspire. Oh my God, if that person was my husband, right? If she was my wife, but you don't know them as a person. So we fantasize about these things. And this is why when the news hits the fan and we start seeing, oh my God, what? This happened, they did what? How shocked were we to see, the whole Jay-Z and Beyonce and Solange in the elevator, and then it came out that he was cheating on her, and we like, what? He cheated on Beyonce? It's like, what? The most beautiful woman in the world. And we see that these things have always been around. And so it just makes you question, right? It makes you question. I don't know if I have an answer to that, but I definitely wonder sometimes, has time made it more complicated, or are we just hyper aware at this point in time?
Well, I'd like to attempt to add something to that. One of the questions you didn't ask was, or not the question, but in The Road Less Traveled by Scott Peck says, love isn't just a feeling, but a commitment to personal and mutual growth. I would like to add to that and say that it's also a societal responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
It used to be the idea that marriage, meaning establishing a family, being productive, rearing children, was your like societal duty,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so I think that a lot of our priorities now have changed. I think that we are part of what's making it difficult now is we are very hyper superficial. Okay. I think that you talked about a book. It was geared towards men, but it was saying that hard times.
Yes. Hard times make strong man, and hard time makes strong man. Strong man makes easy times, something like that. I can get the title for that, but yeah.
I think that, what it was going on to say was that in times of ease, we can be. Well, you tell it. You explain it.
Yeah. So the book is Hard Times Make Strong Man. Strong man. So the book is named after the expression. This is a quote that many people have probably heard.
Okay.
And I want to say, it's been said in so many different ways. I don't know who the originator of this is, but
Okay.
hard times make strong men. Strong men make easy times.
Okay.
Easy times make weak men. And
There's
the idea is it's always a cycle, right? It's always a cycle. And I don't know if this is where you were going with this, but I think that in the book, it essentially talks about we're living in a time of ease. And so what has happened is any time in any society where it becomes easy, the men become weak and then women become stronger. Is that where you was going with that, or no?
I wasn't going there, but I just wanted to talk about not necessarily what happens to the different genders, but just overall.
Okay.
Right? When we're in a time of ease, the point that I was trying to make was that essentially we lose sight of what's important and why it's important. to the point where now we don't have a sense of urgency or a sense of, in my younger years, I'm going to, I'm going to party, go to college, whatever. I'm going to live it up. I'm going to travel. I'm going to do these things. But at some point, I need to settle down, find a person, and build a family. It's kind of like, in your younger years, you're not thinking about, for the most part, voting and paying taxes and things like that. But as you mature and you get into this family, now the things that you value now that weren't even on your radar before. Now you're like, who's your alderman? Do you know who your alderman is? Is it 20? But at 35 and uppers, you know who an alderman is, right?
Or at least you should.
Or at least you should. That might be another topic we talk about.
Yeah.
Home ownership.
Yeah.
But you get the point I'm making, right? You start looking now into voting, you're thinking about taxes, property taxes, the things that are affecting you now. You're looking at schools for your children, right? The neighborhood I want to move into because I'm looking at the school for my children. I'm thinking of the future, like how I want to set my children up. Does that make sense what I'm saying? So what I'm saying is I feel like we've lost sight of all of that. Everybody is so individualized and wants to have a life of ease that any little thing that tells me I have to have a little bit of discipline, I have to have a little bit of restraint, it's like torture. That's the point that I was trying to make with that. And so when it comes to the culture of marriage and relationships, right, the idea of a societal duty has just gone away.
At least in America, right? At least
the culture in America, definitely.
Culture in America. And this is why we're asking, is marriage to gold? And this is why we're saying things like, you don't need to be married, because we're looking at it from a personal gain perspective, right? Right. From a personal gain perspective, you may never need to be married. You may feel like I get all of my needs met from individuals who I meet, people in my life for a season, right? And you're fine with that. You just go from one person to the next. But when you start to kind of go out, to your point, you go from the micro level to the macro level, you start to see like, well, strong nations, if we go to all the way to the top, for those people who are interested in having a strong nation, right? Whether you are talking about United States of America or whether you're talking about your particular community of people.
In your neighborhood. Your city.
It starts with strong families. Right. Like that it's a direct connection. Well, to put it in the middle, strong communities, right? Let's start, right? You have to have that strong communities. When you start narrowing that down, what is in a strong community? Well, we can say a lot of different things. High education, no crime. We plenty of resources. We can say all of that. But at the core of it, what you find is strong families.
Right.
You find a high percentage of married couples in a home with their children.
And the opposite is true when you have a concentrated area that does not have married couples, two parents in the home rearing those children, then you find the opposite of that.
And then everything flows with that, right? So it's like the correlation, right? It's like you find the married home, the married couples are more likely to have what? A higher income. They're more likely to be higher educated. They're more likely to, and once you start going down the more likelies, you start to see how this family dynamic starts to change. And all of it, in a weird way, relates back to this relationship. Because if you and I are in a relationship, going back to the point, and we are intentional, and we have disciplined ourselves, and we have boundaries, then our individual actions are going to be impacted in the community. I'm not going to be in the, whether it's crime or whether it's just debauchery. I'm not going to be doing that, right?
Either one.
Right. Because I'm married.
Because they're not conducive to a long-term relationship.
What does it say? The culture of marriage. Right. So what is the culture of marriage? And so, so you start seeing, and you can tell the difference. And everybody can tell, probably amongst women too, but I know definitely amongst men, you can tell when men are married, because the men who are respecting their wives, they operate differently. They're at the event, they're at the bar, they're at whatever, but they're watching their clock. They're making sure they're leaving. They're making sure a lot of times they're not getting too drunk. They're making sure everything is always above board. Hey, man, it was good hanging out. I'm going to go ahead and get home real quick though. Right? I got things to do. And you're getting home. And then if a bunch of people are doing that, then the streets are empty at midnight. And then it fades into the children. Because if it's two parents in the home, then it goes to the children. You're not about to have children in the street. You're not about to have them, right? You're not about to have them failing in school, because you're going to have both parents in the home holding some sort of discipline or standard. I'm not saying that every home with two parents is like that, but once again, more likely. And we have to always consider the more likely. Nothing is absolute. Well, I know parents who more likely. Well, I know somebody who's not married and their kids are more likely. That's all we're saying.
Right.
When you put it on the scale, more likely.
I like to put it in terms of possibility and probability.
Yes.
Right? It's like first determine if something is possible.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the probability of it. So what you're saying is, yes, it is possible that you can still have two parents in the home and undisciplined, unruly children, right? But the probability of
Yes.
having two parents in the home and the projection of that child's life not being of a what am I trying to say? I just lost my train of thought, but a productive member of society.
Yeah, a productive member of society.
The probability of that child growing up to be a productive member of society is higher with a two-parent home, especially when you have two parents who are intentional about working on themselves, working on the relationship, and being parents to their children. And they're thinking about the future of their relationship, the future of their children.
Yeah. We're not going to get through this section. We got through section, but I want to go back to this question, and I want to attempt to answer it. Like, is love supposed to be effortless, or does effort prove its authenticity? I think I want to make a blanket statement to say love is not effortless. Right? It's not every married couple. I seen this girl on TikTok and she was like, why every time you talk to married people, they be like, marriage is hard. That ain't, that's not appealing. And I think they're right. We do need to make marriage more appealing, but marriage is hard. It is hard. It's not.
Marriage takes work.
Marriage takes work.
And it takes consistent, persistent over time. You never get to a point where now we don't have to work at it anymore.
Right.
And I think that's what married couples mean by it's hard, right?
Yeah.
It's the same thing that single mothers complain about with children. Like, it's hard, and what you're complaining about with an absent parent. And now we actually have a lot more absent mothers, and you got some full-time fathers. So let me just say, as a parent, when you're a single parent, you realize the parent that's not in the home with them, it's so much time, energy, and effort that they're not even participating in, right?
Yeah.
That you realize you're always on as a parent. You know what I mean? But that's what it's like in a relationship. But it doesn't stop people from having children, though. Exactly. And it doesn't stop them from having multiple children. Mm-hmm. So it's the same thing in a relationship. You're always on. There is no break. You're committed to this process, to this journey. And I think that's what married people mean by it's hard. But you're right. We need to change the narrative of that, because when we say that, like...
Because it's like working out. That's how I almost picture it. It's like your muscles hurt, but you're healthier. You feel good after a run, right? Over time, and you and I talk about this a lot, where you have these... I'm going to say dry moments in marriage, right? Where it's like, whatever. And then all of a sudden, somebody comes with some drama and you start listening to that drama. What's the first thing you say? Like, whew, I'm glad I'm married.
I had them issues.
You listen to it, you're like, oh, okay. I'm glad I'm married.
Right. Past
These are not things that you have to worry about, that you have to deal with. It becomes so absent-minded. Like, it's like, huh? What happened? What did you do? And what did they do? And what did they say? And what,
and then add to that too, you're looking at it and you're thinking, but if you hadn't done X, Y, and Z, a lot of times married people can see the progression and backtrack and say, well, the problem started back here.
Yes.
Right?
And it goes back, like 90% of the time, it goes back to the discipline.
Yes.
Like 90% of the time. It's like, I'm not going to judge what you do. You're grown, do what you do. However, like you said, that probably was the issue. Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. And a lot of times, in these relationships, you know what happens? We run into this whole I'm not going to discipline myself issue, all of that good stuff. And the partner, a lot of times, they're probably not okay with it, but we kind of feel forced to, because we don't want to be seen as clingy, or we don't want to be seen as I don't know what's the word I'm looking for, overbearing or something like that. And so we kind of allow these things to happen, but we're unhappy with it. And that person gets comfortable and they keep doing it and they keep doing it. And then before long, either I hit a point where I'm not comfortable no more, or something happens. Because remember, I said discipline is also about protecting your marriage.
Right.
It's not necessarily, you may feel like, well, I'm fine. It's also about protecting your marriage as well. And it may be nothing going on.
Until it is.
Until it is. Right. And a lot of different things, a lot of different ways. And we're not always talking about infidelity. It could be anything, right? It could be a variety of, it's how you spend your money, right? And a perfect example of that, we talk about this with somebody we know, where it's like this person put no restrictions on spending.
Okay.
And they complain in private, right? But now you coming along like, hey, I don't like the way you've been spending. You haven't put restrictions on that person. And so now you've been just harboring this resentment of how they're spending. And
or I wouldn't put it as putting restrictions on that person. What I would say is that you guys never sat down and talked about finances and came to an agreement on spending. You never had a financial goal together. And so because of that, and that's actually contrary to popular belief, the number one reason why people get divorced is finances.
Yeah.
Not infidelity. Right? So a lot of times the issue is you guys never sat down and went through your taxes together and talked about literally how much you make, how much I make, what our bills are together. Some of us are in a home or in a relationship and we're living so separate or whatever. And then now as time goes on, you realize like, this is a problem. But a lot of that, if you had sat down together, just had some discipline and went over that together, then you would have, you might find yourself not even in that. So I don't want to say you didn't put restrictions on that person, because it's not your job to put restrictions on another adult. It's sitting down and coming to an agreement about how we're going to move forward with our finances in this relationship. That's what I would say. But a lot of times we don't want to, especially when we know that person may be a shopaholic, right? That person might have a little thing. They like to spend money. They don't want to be restricted. A lot of times we may not speak up on that thing because we don't want to create conflict. So a lot of times we avoid addressing things because we don't want to create an immediate conflict. But that conflict is what you're talking about, resentment, issues come into play because we didn't address it. So you can't be afraid of conflict. You have to address those things and nip it in the bud right away.
Okay. So I want to move on to our next section. Is there something else you want to talk on that section? Some of these kind of overlap. I'm going to skip over this one. I'm going to go to segment 4.
Okay.
No, not segment 4. Yes, segment 4. But where it says, reference the book, The Game by Neil Strauss. You see that? This is a book I recommend. It may be out of the norm for marriage.
What's the book?
The book is called The Game by Neil Strauss. So in this book, he talks about he's a pickup line artist, essentially. And the whole book is interesting because it's about this guy who teaches another group of guys who don't typically get girls, kind of nerdy, right? And he's like, I can teach you how to get any girl you want to. And he teaches them like all of these attraction tips and pickup lines and various different things. And throughout the book, they work. The guy talks about it. He talks about why they work. It's an interesting book to read. But the plot twist at the end, not to give it a spoilers alert, not to give it away, he finds this woman that he's attracted to. He's like, okay, I'm attracted to this woman. He uses all the game to get her. And he gets her. And she's unhappy with him because he is not who he had portrayed himself to be.
Okay.
Right? And so in the end of the book, he talks about how in order to have a sustainable relationship, you have to be authentically yourself, because you want to be with that person forever. And I think that a lot of us get caught into that trap. We get caught into the trap of, you're presenting your best self, which you should, but you're also presenting a caricature. And we get attracted to the character. We become who people want us to be, right? To some extent. And so the question is for this. Not the question, the statement from this book. And I want you to kind of speak to this. He says, modern dating focuses on attraction over connection. So this is going back to the overarching question. Are we making these relationships too complicated? Right? You may be on job interviews. For those of us who have had those type of jobs, you get invited out to dinner. It's always about, you're not thinking about, if somebody says to me, hey, let's get lunch. Let's connect. Let's me and you, let's talk.
Right. Over coffee.
Yeah. My mind isn't going, you want to network over what restaurants you're taking me to. I'm concerned about, if I want to network with them, the person that I'm meeting. I'm concerned about that connection.
Right.
Now, this is not saying that you need to go to a janky place or nothing like that. But what it's saying is that where's your attention at? Where's the attention held for this relationship?
What do you value?
What do you value? Because it could be a walk, right? It could be, some of us live in some beautiful cities, right? You can take a walk, and from, it's like I said, some of us live in beautiful cities, and you'll get more information from that walk than you will from a lot of other activities. We're trying to prove that. So,
I would want to add to that and say, you got to understand what we talked about before with intention. What is your intention? And what are you looking for in the future? Right? You have to make decisions now for your future self. And I think that when it comes to dating, the connection, like if you're looking for if you're not looking for a long-term relationship, then you can say everything we're saying, you can throw out the door. But we're talking about people who are looking for long-term commitment, right? And if that is what you're looking for, then that is the purpose of dating for you, right? The purpose of dating is not these quick hookups to see how much you can get somebody to spend on you, right? I think we're treating dating as I can't even think of the word, but as an experience, right? We're treating dating as an experience.
Somebody said, I don't know, TikTok, Instagram, but it was like, at this point, I'm just looking for somebody to find new restaurants with and take flights with. And everybody like this, like, yes. I'm like, that sounds good, but that's the temporary thing.
Right.
Because if I'm just looking for a person to find new restaurants with, to eat good food, and a person to go on vacation with, that's replaceable. And this is where I go back to what I'm gonna say, are we overcomplicating it? Because it's hard to believe, but our grandparents didn't take vacations. Not like that. For a lot of Black people, it was the trip down, if you're from the North at least, the trip down South, right? A lot of us, our families migrated from the South to the North, and you would have this summer vacation when you would go down and visit your grandparents in the South, for those of us. But for other people, even still, it was a driving trip. It was a road trip that you would go visit family. Maybe you go see some sights. But this idea of flights was not even a thing. And also, too, we're also at a peak point in restaurants. And that's also hard for me to conceptualize because I grew up in restaurants. But looking back, just go look at when these restaurants was founded. When was Rare Lobster founded? When was, all your top restaurants that you like to go to? We talking about 70s and 80s.
And it's interesting that you say that, because thinking about when I grew up, I had two parents in the home, both worked, but my mother cooked. I can remember maybe a Friday night, maybe a Saturday night, but 6 days out of the week, we had a home cooked meal. I know that times have changed. It's we're always on the go, right? We're always on the go. But the point that I'm making is we're making relationships a little bit more difficult because we have now these expectations that I think cloud or take away from the focus of what this really is supposed to be like.
Yeah.
We've have a lot of unrealistic expectations. And so because these things are not conducive for long-term relationship, we feel shorted or we feel like we're settling because we think that we should be able to eat out seven days a week.
Yeah.
Who can financially afford that?
Right.
In reality, right? We think that we should be able to hop on a flight, right? Every month if we want, every 2 months, every 3 months, right? It's like when you just break down financially, a lot of times you realize we're living in debt and living check to check.
Yeah.
So even as an individual, that's not realistic. That's not sustainable. Right? And so I think that yes, we are making relationships more difficult because we have just unsustainable expectations. And when that's not, and we think that the person who has, or the man that has read the book you've talked about, and he's love bombing and he's got all these tactics, right, to really woo me in, it's just kind of like, but it's not sustainable and it's not real.
Yeah.
So your expectation already is setting you up for failure, and you're not finding what it is that you say that you really want, which is long-term relationship. So I think that that's the first myth we got to bust up is you're approaching it wrong.
Two things you just made me think about. I'm going to reference them. One, let's talk about relationship tactics, and number two, I'm going to reference the body positivity movement.
Okay.
I'm going to start off with the latter.
Okay.
It's not about the body positivity movement, but I think that the body positivity movement has gotten a lot of slack because people are just like, this is ridiculous, right? But it started off as something that was positive, right? Hey, not everybody can be skinny. You need to love the body that you're in. It's okay to have some extra pounds. I believe off of that, right? But where it took a turn was when you start seeing people who are unhealthily overweight, right? Saying, well, I don't need to lose weight. I don't need to do this, right? And people are like, whoa, 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 whoa. Love your body, but you still need to be healthy. We took it too far.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't acknowledge that the body positivity movement is really just a derivative of this idea that we have. I don't even know if we have a word for it, where we've been told that we should be able to do and have whatever we want to. Because what you said was the flights. I see so many people talk about, like, remember I told you, I'm worth it. I deserve it.
Mm-hmm.
I am worthy of it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, it's a very interesting concept because what you're saying is that if I choose not to take 4 vacations a year, that I'm not worthy. Well, you may
Or I'm settling.
Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. And so we've blurred the lines of responsibility by attaching it to a value.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like the body positivity movement has done the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
They're blurring the lines of responsibility, health responsibilities. You have a responsibility to yourself to monitor your cholesterol, your blood pressure levels, your obesity weight, right? Because it's not just about me looking at you and saying you look good or look bad. It's about the fact that you may die early. It's about the fact that your bones may not can make your joints, right? All of these various different things. It's not just about what you look like, right? So the same thing about this. Wait. It's not just about my value, whether or not I'm taking a flight, whether or not I can eat at Ruth Chris, whether or not I can, right? It's not about a value. It's a responsibility thing, right? So we blurred the lines, and I think that that's all I was going to say, that we blurred those lines. The second thing, tactics. Until I read The Game, I couldn't quite put in words the reason why I didn't like books like the Steve Harvey book, right? Think Like a Man, Act Like a Lady. And it's not just his book.
Okay.
I feel like there are 2 different types of relationship books. And if you guys notice, none of the relationship books that we offer are tactic books. So I just mentioned The Game, but I gave you the caveat of why I mentioned it, because in the end of the book, he talks about how it doesn't work.
Right.
That's not the way you gain sustainable love.
Right.
All the books that we mention are about self-reflection.
Yes.
If you get in a relationship book that's telling you these 5 steps to, throw it away.
Mm-hmm.
Because 90% of the work in a relationship is right here.
Right.
You cannot get another person to do anything. And I think that's one of the things, maybe we'll talk about another point. You and I talk a lot about boundaries, but clarifying with people that boundaries are not about making another person do anything.
Mm-hmm.
It's about what you're going to do,
Mm-hmm.
right? I'm setting boundaries for myself,
Mm-hmm.
right? If me and you are having an argument, I can't say my boundary is for you to shut up. I can't make you shut up, right? But I can say I'm removing myself from this conversation because it has gone too far.
Mm-hmm.
That's me taking an action upon myself. And 90% of the relationship advice that you need to take is about yourself.
Mm-hmm.
It's all about you. And we're hyper focused on using tactics, psychology, manipulation, strategies to get people to do what we want them to do for us.
Mm-hmm.
How do you get that man? Remember that book? No, not a book. Probably was a book. But remember the movie, Two Can Play That Game with Vivica Fox
yes.
and Morris Chestnut?
Yes.
I think it was,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, that's where we've been.
The games we're playing to try to manipulate each other into doing and being what we want each other to be.
Yeah,
right.
remember, I don't know if you, when I was young, I used to be like, well, you get a girl number, don't text her right away. You don't want to look thirsty, right? Right? We play these games, and I see it. I especially see it with Shira 7. I love me some Shira. I love me some Sprinkle. She has me cracking up. But if you listen to her, all of her things are like tactics.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we look at it. Some people are following it, I guess. Some people laughing at it. It seems silly, but all of her things are about tactics. How to get, what's her thing? A high achieving, a high paid man. How to get a man to pay your bills.
But in defense of Shira 7, though, because of the tactic approach, even with that, a lot of people have misunderstood her message.
Mm-hmm.
Because she is a married woman with children, rearing those children. I think her whole point was just simply being realistic about finding a man that could financially take care of you. That's it. That was her point. So that you can be the mother, stay at home, and rear your children. Right? So I just saw a recent video that she did, and basically people chiding her for, I don't see you on flights, I don't see you this and that, or I think at one point had seen like a little bit of her home. People had this idea that she was living in a mansion somewhere, drinking mimosas all day and had nannies. She never said that. She said finding a man that could take care of you. But again, let's go to expectation. We have an unrealistic expectation that means you're going to be a millionaire.
Mm-hmm.
You need to find the millionaire. But that's not what that means.
Yeah.
Right? And so I think from that point, I just lost my train of thought. But the point I was trying to make from that was, but in her defense, though, you have people that are took literal what she said. I'm pretty sure she's attracted to her husband.
Mm-hmm.
She's a good-looking woman. I'm pretty sure her husband is probably a good-looking man, right? There's attraction there still. She was very intentional about what she was looking for, though, and she found that with him because she had boundaries, she had standards. But you literally have women who are so transactional about this that they are literally getting with, imagine a 30-year-old woman hooking up with a 75-year-old man.
Mm-hmm.
Not attracted to him whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That was not what her point was.
Right.
She wasn't talking about hooking up and getting these experiences. She was talking about long-term commitment, and she just had a strategy to how to approach that.
All right. Welcome back to Traditionally Untraditional. Our technology keeps giving us issues, but better than last time. So we're good.
They don't even know that we left.
Well, they'll know now. All right. So I wanted you to touch on something I was looking at. We left off talking about the tactics, and I talked about the body positivity, right? And what was the last point that she was making?
About Shira 7.
Shira
And
7.
people missed the point. She wasn't saying to get with an old millionaire that you was wrinkly and you weren't even attracted to, just so that you could sit up and drink mimosas.
Well, you know what? I think that her and Kevin Samuels to me are kind of the same person in different realms. I do think it got to a point like that it's clickbait. I think she says some things that because she knows, but I think that if you actually sit and listen to her, I agree with you. I think that her message has been you have to be where the provider men are, and a lot of times women are not, and that's kind of her message there. And I think that another thing that she jokingly says, because you meant about like, because somebody going to say she does. She say you need an older ugly man, but once again, I often think that her husband is older than her, but like your point, I don't think she wasn't attracted to him, right? But I do think that she is hinting to that, going back to the point of the whole type thing. And she's being facetious because she's saying old and ugly. But what she's probably saying is you probably need somebody more mature. He's probably not going to be the finest man you met.
Might not be your type.
Might not be your type, right? Because once again, attraction there's so many
layers to that.
Layers to it. And partially going back to the book The Game, you show that because you take a bunch of guys that are nerdy, you basically give them a makeover. What was the old TV show? I don't know, Ricky Lake or something, when they get a makeover. Like, he used to be a nerd. Now look at him. They bring him out and the crowd go, woo, right? So it's kind of like that. He took these people, gave them a makeover, and they were able to get women, right? And so kind of the same thing happens. And I think that the same thing happens. So I'm going to make my point. It's the same thing with women and surgeries, and I'm not attacking surgeries or BBLs. Do what you want to do, but I do think that he was making a point the other day. Something about, is it how you dress or the body you have dictates the type of man you have? Was you telling me that on TikTok?
Oh, I was saying that how you dress. I'm always big on, my mother is a seamstress. I never had a store-bought dress or winter coat until I got to 7th grade. And, at that point, I'm in middle school and I want, the name brand stuff that everybody else is wearing. But essentially, like, something that I've learned from my mother is styles and cuts. And so not every person has the same body type, body shape. And what I was referring to is not everything looks good on everybody. And so that was the first point I was making, is you need to learn your body shape so that you can wear cuts of clothing that actually flatter the shape that you have, right? And even colors. Sometimes I see outfits that women have on and I'm thinking, that would be cute on somebody else, but the color doesn't look good on you, nor does the cut of that fit your body type. The second thing coming from that was a TikTok video where a girl was talking about how with BBLs and things like that, right? Your body shape, but also how you dress will attract a certain type of man to you, right? So if you're looking for a man who values family, then if you're the BBL girl, if your body, and I say that because everybody's BBL is not.
What would you say to the women who say, I don't got a BBL, I'm just shaped like that and I can't hide it?
That's a good question. What I would say to that is the balance. We have this idea, and I see this with women all the time. Women that you're referring to are women who are shapely and maybe even naturally shapely and dress very provocatively. Let's just go ahead and say it. And when you comment on that style of dress, a lot of times it's, so I'm supposed to be, I can't even think of the words they say, but I'm supposed to be a church mom, right? I'm supposed to be, we have extremes, right? Where you have extreme where you're provocatively dressed versus now I'm a church lady, right? And we don't have a balance of in between, right? To be attractive yet modest. That's what I say. I always push or support being attractive and wearing things that are attractive on you, but also maintaining your modesty at the same time because it attracts a certain type of man to you. That's what I would say to that. Wear what you want to wear, but as a responsible, mature adult, you got to get to the point where you realize the energy and what I'm giving off, it attracts a certain energy there. And I think that I think men understand that a little bit more, but that's hard for women. And I don't know why. I really don't understand why that concept is difficult for us.
Well,
Where,
because, well, I tell you what women say all the time
okay.
is that men are giving those women the attention,
Mm. Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
how do you, you know, for men and for me, I always say it's simple, like, but they're not marrying those women. And then, of
Mm-hmm.
course, to come back is like, well, some of them do. And that's why I was telling you before, it's like,
But
yeah, you're going to
what
see.
type of, because we know that.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
know that. We see that. We see it's kind of like the pool of men that will get married, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have a pool of men that just are not going to get married
Mm-hmm.
at all. So as a woman, right, if I'm talking to my daughters once they're starting to approach the dating age and all of that, right, there's a pool of men that will just never get married. Marriage is not a value of his. X that off, right?
Yeah.
I think we have this idea if you're in a relationship, then it ultimately leads to that. That's not true at all. So you got to understand, this is what I tell my daughters. I say, women are different. Girls are different. We grow up, most of us at least, thinking about once we have children, what we're going to name them, right? Some of us even think about, practice. Let's say we have a crush on somebody, right? And I still think little girls do it now where you're practicing writing your name with his last name. You know what I mean? You're thinking
Mm-hmm.
about your wedding day and what you're going to wear and you're planning it out. Boys don't think like that.
Mm-hmm.
Men do not think like that, right? So you got to understand that first of all. So not all men are even in the pool of marriage, and you gotta quickly dismiss that. So of the pool of men who will get married, you have types. You have a type of man who has a strong sense of duty when it comes to himself,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so with that type of man, his center of focus is himself,
Mm-hmm.
not building a life with someone else, but literally fitting the boxes of his life and what that's supposed to look like. And this particular man can have a box of a wife, right? She fits in this box. But with those particular type of men, they don't choose women that they respect.
Mm-hmm.
So that type of man could have a woman in that box. And even then, how the type of woman depends on the type of man. When I'm talking about the men who have women in that box that fit that, I'm going to get married because that's his value, but that's how he has valued himself as a man. I'm going to be a married, I'm going to be a provider, but he's not thinking about her, right? He's not thinking of a compliment to him except for that she fit in his mold. Does that make sense what I'm saying? And so you have a man who, let's say he's a businessman, right? Let's say he's in corporate America, right? So the wife that he's going to fit in that can go to the parties, that can look the part, she probably won't be the scantily dressed, promiscuously dressed type of woman. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You might have a man though who wants the eye candy. I need a baddie on my arm, right? And so he gets this woman who fits that mold and he may marry her because that's his idea, that's his status idea. But in that case, neither of those men respect that woman.
You know what's interesting? Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but you just made me think of something. I saw a TikTok where these two men were talking about how they're not friends with their wives. Like, you friends with your wife? You friends? Like, nah, I ain't friends with your wife, blah, blah. And because you mentioned respect. And I think that plays into this. When I'm getting with this woman, yes, I want her to be fine as wine. I want her to be all of that. But if it's going to be a relationship, to your point, like I have to see her as something of value to me. I have to see her as you mentioned it, an addition to me. Um, and so a thought that I had just now was that we don't talk about this, but when men get women like that they can mistreat, abuse, they look down upon, they don't see them as equal, it's their way of not hurting themselves.
Explain.
If I get somebody that I feel I'm better than, that I can look down upon, that I can mistreat, I'm never in a position to be hurt by her. Women do it too. But I had that thought specifically because as a man, why wouldn't I want my woman to be my partner, my equal? Right? Why would I make statements like I don't love my wife? Why would you? What? It's a defense mechanism, so you're never in a position to be hurt. Men just don't like to say that they're hurt. They don't like to say that they were crying in the room. But I think that that's what that is. So what happens is I get me a woman I can control. I get me a woman that's you know, like Coming to America. She barks when I say bark. She jumps when I say jump. Right? She sits in the house. Right? Everything about that woman I can control. And typically, I'm gonna go. Those men go do their own thing. Right? Yeah, but I really think it's a way for them not to put themselves in a position to be left to hurt.
Okay.
No, just an interesting thought there.
So what I was gonna continue to say was, so yes, you do have men that will get married, but you have to. This goes back to your value system as a woman, right? Being intentional, knowing what you're truly looking for in a partner, and you might be okay with that. You might be okay with that, especially if that man is financially taking care of you. We used to call that a kept woman, right? A woman who a man was taking care of you 100%. And just like in any relationship where you have a dependent and a dependent on a person, right? A lot of times those women are I want to say you're not an equal in a relationship. You're almost treated as a child in the relationship, right? That man doesn't truly respect you. So I would say you have to ask yourself as a woman, do you want to be a kept woman or do you want to be with a man who respects you, values you, and sees you as an equal partner in life?
Yeah.
And so that's what I would say to that as far as what you're attracting to you. And so going back to what started this is, yes, for a woman, how you dress, your style of dress is going to attract a certain type of man. It is.
So this is the final question. We asking this question to our listeners too, for people to comment and give their thoughts.
Okay.
What personal beliefs might be making, now this is the question for the viewers, what personal beliefs may be making your relationship harder than it needs to be?
This is a self-reflection question.
It's a self-reflection question. But we can answer it from a general perspective. We don't have to be self-reflective here. But in general, because we're talking about, and the reason, I think it connects perfectly to who we are, traditionally untraditional. I think that men, remember in one of my TikTok videos, I made the comment that men want to still be Mr. from Color Purple. Men are now they're battling with what it means to be a man, right? Nature made this easy back in the day. Men were stronger, right? We were bigger. Easy. Protect. Provide. Our physique made it for that. We had years of farming, whether it was hunter-gatherer, whether you catching an animal, farming, the big machinery, things of that sort. And they're still farmers. They're still lumberjack men's men. But most of us are not that. And when it comes to the reality of what being a man is, we struggle because for so long, being a man was about control. Control over your woman, control over your children. And we're in a point now where we're either battling with the woman we with, give me control, woman, or we're looking for a woman that's willing to give us complete control. And most women of value are not okay with that idea. And so for men, we have to reevaluate leadership because we're still traditional. We still believe the man is the head of household. We still believe the man is to lead. But what does that look like today when you're not going to literally catch a wildebeest? When she can work to bring home the bacon just like you can work to bring home, right?
Mhm.
When she can, in theory, pay for the mortgage the same way that you can. She can afford to take herself on trips. Women don't need men for anything. Women literally needed men up until the past 50, 60 years. Women couldn't own property. Many times they couldn't work of anything of substance, housekeeping, things of that sort. But the work that really brought in money, real money, was all reserved for men. We still see that. We still see the income gaps and things of that sort. And there's a lot of ways you can look at that. But either way, we know that in modern times, women don't need men in that way. You can argue that women still need men for protection, sure, walking down the street. But for the most part, if you live in a safe neighborhood, safe community, women are okay to live by themselves. We have the police. We're not, you don't literally need a man to protect you from those type of aspects, right? And then there's the other side of it of what is the role of the woman? Because as we've often said, the home is a woman's base, but it's not her place.
I was gonna say that. I
Right?
was going to answer to like from a woman's perspective,
Yeah.
like how we are making relationships harder than they have to be. And it goes right along with what you're saying. We are in a new position where, like you're saying, we don't need a man to do the things that we used to need a man for. We pretty much in the society that we live in can be self-dependent. But now what does that mean in a relationship? What does that mean now in a family? Right? Are roles still important? Or can we just throw roles out the window? And with traditionally untraditional, we believe in traditional roles, but in an untraditional way, because we don't believe the traditional. We believe that the traditional roles were a bit oppressive.
Yes.
They were very not concise is the word I'm looking for. There was no leeway for adaptation, right? Because times have changed. And because times have changed, like you said, now that the woman is out of the home, we have two parents that are working. Nobody can be here 24/7 maintaining the house, right? So I think the struggle for us as women is, how do we now still be the nurturing, the caring, the inspiring? That's our nature. Our nature dictates our roles, is what I would say. How do we still do that with, and how do I now perceive the man, and how do I now allow his nature? Because a male's nature is to be the lead, right? How do I not be in competition with his nature when so much of masculinity was about the ability to be the sole provider?
Yes.
Right? To be the one to provide, maintain, and protect. But now that I can do so a lot, be self-independent, how do we make this thing work? And I think a lot of women are struggling in that area because I think that we're competing with men. We've that feminist movement has gotten to us and really has, I think, misconstrued. And so we don't even realize the power in femininity and how it complements the masculinity. And I think we're making relationships more difficult because we're in competition with men.
Yes. Men have to let go. You can just pause to reach over and tap it if you can, because it's not recording. Like I don't even understand. Rocking. So picking up. This made me think. There's I don't know what it's called. Somebody may jump into the comments and tell me. But men have a believed privilege. And men have to let that go. And the privilege of being able to roam. You see it across every movie. A man is to roam. A man coming
And
to
this is
America.
across cultures. This is not just
Yes.
America. This is a worldwide idea that men have had. And for the most part, because men have been allowed to go about unchecked.
Unchecked.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so I think men of today are feeling, you know how this may sound crazy, and I'm trying, I don't want to use the example that's in my head, but I'm just gonna go with it.
What?
So I saw a video. It was like maybe in the 1950s, 1960s, right? But probably earlier. But cameras were around, so bear with me. Black and white, somewhere in there.
Mm-hmm.
And it was this white person talking. And she was talking about, man, it's so hard for us as white people. It's so hard to be able to get by, to become, to make money, to become wealthy. I'm just listening, trying to see where this is going to go. And then she says, our grandparents, they had slaves. We're not able to have slaves, so it's harder for us. And it's a very interesting concept. Like, what? That's wild. It's almost how I hear men today. Because there was a time period. I just seen a skit. Somebody did the what was Joe Jackson? What's the Jackson mama? What's their mama name?
Oh, I don't know that.
But you know that scene in the movie where he wanted to cheat and he was like, "Baby, I need some ice cream."
Yes, because the phone was ringing, and it was.
And
the
she
clue.
was like, "We already got ice cream, but we ain't got butter pecan ice cream."
No.
And she was like, and she knew
something was up.
Something was up. She knew. But she put her shoes on, got her coat, and went to the stove so he can make that phone call, right? And we're living in a time period where
she didn't go to the stove. She was smart. But go ahead. What's your point?
But obviously he had used that line before.
True.
Right? So
okay.
Women not tolerating that. So
are not tolerating
that. And on top of that, with the amount of technology we have, it's hard to escape. So with that being said, it's kind of like men in a weird way miss that. We miss the ability to roam. And so even though we're not saying it, we're saying it. We're saying like, man, our grandfathers and grandfathers, you're right. They was unaccountable. There was no cell phones, right? There was no, you left the house to go to work at whatever time you left the house to go to work, and you came home at whatever time you came home. And what you did in between is what you did in between. There was no accountability for you. And this is why we jokingly say a lot of men have families on the other block, down the street, because it was true, because they could be gone for periods of time and not be questioned. And in a weird way, we living in this time period where it's like we almost missed that. We missed that ability to roam.
Can I add to this?
Mm-hmm.
This is the irony of that, though. These same men who may unconsciously have this feeling don't like their daddy.
Exactly. Yes.
That's the irony of that.
Yes. Because I thought you was going to hit it.
I'm going to let you hit it.
You can't mistreat the mother and expect the children to love you.
Exactly.
And so many men go, I take care of my kids. My kid love. Not if you mistreating their mother.
Right.
Because children will always have a special relationship with the mother.
And a lot of times men don't even realize how it's affecting their children until their children become adults. What you're saying, that men say, I take care of my kids. Yeah, you have young children who can't express themselves yet, right? They keep to themselves because you're still you're still the father. There's a respect level. They're young. They can't articulate what's happening yet. But once they become adults and they can now reflect back, and they're now forming their value system for what they want out of life, and they're having children, and they're looking at how they want to be for their children, and they realize how much they lacked with you. You're getting older now, and you not start to have some health problems, or, financial things happen. Maybe you get laid off in this and that. And those same children that you're saying, I take care of my kids, now they're nowhere to be seen.
Mm-hmm.
They don't even want to drive you to a doctor's appointment. They're definitely not about to let you move in.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
That is the irony for me with men and that idea.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, when are men going to bridge the idea of that's a flawed idea?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because it goes back to what we were talking about with strong communities and family. Family is two parents in the home rearing those children, equal touches to those children.
Yeah.
That you'll see that studies show that the traditional family is best for all. That, we talk about men and their financial, you talk about it all the time, how a lot of times young women are approaching relationships and they want a man to already have reached a certain stature, but what they don't realize is that's why you run into a lot of married men, because studies show that men don't start to make financial gains until after marriage. Right? And the only point I'm making by that is the benefits of marriage, right? A lot of times we gauge things not realizing it's time and it's the foundation of marriage that starts to open doors for people. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The slippery slope that men fall into is that there's no shortage of women. Right. And so what men feel like is there will never be a point, at least they feel like this, why I don't have a woman. And some of that is true. And it's like, but what you're missing, to your point, is the family side of it. You, as a man, will probably be able to have, if you got your stuff together, even if you don't got your stuff together, to be honest, you can probably find a woman who will put up with you, who will be there with you. You'll probably find that. But to your point, though, your legacy of family and children and stuff like that, that's what you're missing. So you can't be a man who says you believe in family, you believe in legacy, and you're not doing right by your children. And
by the mother of your children.
Yep, and you can't do right by the mother of by your children if you're not doing right by the mother of those children. Mm-hmm. It just keeps going. Mm-hmm. And so when you start seeing you're gonna end up having multiple baby mamas, multiple wives, multiple whatever you want to call it. Those disconnected families, you can try to lie to yourself all you want to. It's hard to bridge it when you're mistreating. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Then women don't like you. Mm-hmm. And then it becomes a whole nother thing. And ignorance is bliss. And that's why you don't think about it, because you live in your life. You know, you call them kids, check in, like you said, you think they're good until they're old enough to be like, my daddy he wasn't never around. He was rolling. He was doing this. He was doing that. He was, it's a family thing. Mm-hmm. So, any closing remarks? Any final points?
Oh man, we've said a lot.
We have. We've been talking for a minute.
We've said a lot. But I think the biggest thing is to recognize that relationships are built off of long-term relationships are built off of connection. Mm-hmm. They are not superficial. And I would say that it takes effort and intention. And if you're struggling in that area, maybe take some time to reflect and ask, are your expectations realistic? Do you have a fairy tale idea and a highly materialistic idea approach to your dating, mm-hmm. right? You got to ask yourself, what is the goal? What is the end result that I'm looking for? Am I looking for a long-term committed relationship? Then you're going to have to approach it as trying to really get to know someone and connect with them and see if this person's values match your values and if you guys are compatible with growing and being on that journey together.
Okay. Thank you for listening to Traditionally Untraditional. We will catch you next time. Make sure to follow us on TikTok, on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all the social media platforms that you can. We provide helpful advice, insights to relationships, and other topics as well. Not just relationships, but also politics and culture. We are Traditionally Untraditional, where we have traditional values and we do it in an untraditional way. Thank you.